Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Flourish FM, a podcast for the good life. Our guest today is Dr. Daniel Goleman, psychologist and author of Emotional Intelligence. Daniel Goleman has transformed the way the world educates children, relates to family and friends, leads and conducts business. He's a frequent speaker on campuses and to businesses of all kinds and sizes, and he has worked with organizations around the globe, examining the way social and emotional competencies impact the bottom line. Ranked as one of the 10 most influential business thinkers by the Wall Street Journal, Daniel's articles in the Harvard Business Review are among the most frequently requested reprints. Daniel has won many awards, including the Harvard Business Review McKinsey Award, Best Article of the Year. The Harvard Graduate School of Arts and Sciences awarded him its Centennial Medallion. Apart from writing on emotional intelligence, Daniel has written books on topics including self-deception, creativity, transparency, meditation, social and emotional learning, eco-literacy, and the ecological crisis. His most recent book was published this year. It's called Optimal: How to Sustain Personal and Organizational Excellence Every Day, and it shows why emotional intelligence can help each of us have rewarding and productive days. Daniel's online program, his Emotional Intelligence program, offers anyone a deep understanding of the competencies of self-awareness, self-management, empathy, and social skill. And there's a link to that program, his latest book, his website, social media, and other books in our show notes. This was a fascinating conversation. I learned a huge amount. I hope you all do too. And the key themes we discussed today were how emotional intelligence supports human flourishing. And Dan puts forward a really interesting account of human flourishing and its relationship to emotional intelligence. We also talk about how emotional intelligence helps human beings fulfill their potential and reach an optimal state. And we talk about his definition of what it means to achieve an optimal state, which is the focus of his most recent book, Optimal, which relates what it means to achieve an optimal state to emotional intelligence. We talk about the most effective strategies for building, cultivating emotional intelligence throughout our lives, from childhood to adulthood, in today's world and in an uncertain future, and what the future holds for emotional intelligence. It's a great conversation. Hope you love it as much as we do. This is Emotional Intelligence and Resilience with EI pioneer, Dr. Daniel Goleman. Daniel, welcome. How are you doing?
Oh, it's great to be here. Thanks.
Great to have you here. It's an honor. Thank you so much for joining us today. So really enjoyed reading your new book, Optimal. Thank you so much for your team sharing it with me. But before we dive into that and various concepts you discussed in there, let's start with the fundamentals. Perhaps the most fundamental question about emotional intelligence, or EI as we'll talk about it. So despite becoming widely known worldwide since the first research to EI in 1990, there's still many misconceptions about it. So what exactly is EI, and what does it mean to be emotionally intelligent?
Right. So let's talk about the misconceptions first, because one of the popular misconceptions has to do with how widespread the concept has become. It's a very popular idea, the EQ. I don't use the word EQ, I use EI for emotional intelligence, but people, they know what it means. They think that it means non-cognitive abilities, not your IQ, other ways of being smart. Mm-hmm. That's more or less true, but I think there are probably a wide range of ways of being smart. The emotional intelligence model I prefer, and it's pretty much a generic model agreed on by all of the different theorists in the field, is that emotional intelligence has 4 domains of ability. The first is self-awareness, knowing how you're feeling and how those feelings shape your perception and thought and impulse to act. The second domain is managing those feelings, not letting your upsets, your rage, your panic paralyze you or make you do something you regret later. Mm-hmm. Staying positive, being agile and nimble and adjusting to change and so on. That's all self-management. Staying focused on your goals, that's important. The third part is basically empathy, sensing how other people feel without their telling you in words, because they'll never tell you in words. They'll tell you facial expression, tone of voice, and do you pick it up or not? And if so, There are three kinds of empathy. What kind do you have? Just cognitive empathy, so you understand how they think about things? Well, that's good because you can communicate well. You understand the language they use to themselves to parse reality and to explain what's going on, and you can use those same terms. But do you have emotional empathy where you sense how they feel? Mm-hmm. That's usually a nonverbal feeling. You get it in your body. There's a brain-to-brain connection, actually, a linkage that helps with that. And the third is little talked about, but I think actually the most important. It's called technically empathic concern. And that's a variety of empathy that we want in our boss, in our spouse, in our partners, in everyone we know. It means they not only know how you think and feel, they actually give a damn. They care about it. They're concerned. And they want what's best for you. And the fourth part of emotional intelligence is relationship management, essentially. Putting that all together to have effective relationships.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. How has that view evolved so next year will be 30 years since you published the book, Emotional Intelligence, right? Which was...
Well, the concept of emotional intelligence is not mine. It was proposed by Peter Salovey, a friend of mine. He became the president of Yale University. He was a junior psychologist when he proposed it with his graduate student, John Mayer. They wrote an obscure article. I say obscure, it was in an obscure journal with the title Emotional Intelligence. At the time, I was working at the New York Times as a science journalist. And my job was to look at obscure journals and see what was new and interesting and then write it up in a way that people would get it. And so I thought, wow, emotional intelligence, what a great concept. It sounds like an oxymoron. You don't put emotion together with intelligence, but they're talking about being intelligent about emotion, which I thought was really great. So I used that as the title of a book I'd been writing, Emotional Intelligence. Yeah. That book became a kind of worldwide phenomena. And that spread the concept pretty much.
And those four key areas of EI, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, if you like, and the ability to manage relationships, were those always part of this construct of EI, or have those evolved over the years?
The original definition didn't use those exact terms, but you could map them. And in fact, now there are probably a dozen theories of emotional intelligence, each having its own nuance and variation. But, I was co-chair of a consortium for research on emotional intelligence for years and years. And we pretty much had almost every camp of emotional intelligence represented in that. And that model, that four-part model I just described, was kind of generically agreed on by everyone as yes. Yeah. Then they have variations within that.
Right. And there's, as far as I understand it, there's never been a strong desire to kind of measure strictly emotional intelligence, but there are measures out there. So with those four areas, is there a rough kind of amount of each a person needs to have to be emotionally intelligent, or is it more a holistic view of a balance between them?
As you say, there are many questionnaires, many maps, many assessments based on different theories of emotional intelligence. Mine looks at competencies of outstanding performers that are based in each of those four domains. And I have an assessment, or I co-designed an assessment for how other people would see you if you were good at, say, managing your emotions or being agile and adaptable. What would that look like to other people? And I say other people because if you had people assess themselves, you're liable to a huge error. Yeah. If you only do a self-assessment, people who have blind spots might rate themselves as really good at something when they're actually awful, as attested by people who know them well. And we find that the people who are worst in self-awareness, for example, are also bad at developing the competencies of excellence based on emotional intelligence. So I have a course in this. It's called the Daniel Goleman Emotional Intelligence Program or something. It's Key Step Media has it. I don't know if you do show notes. You might put it in the show notes.
Oh, yeah, I've already put it in the show notes. Yeah, we got it here.
Great, yeah. So that helps people understand all of the aspects of emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And then there's an assessment where you ask people who know you well, whose opinions you trust, to rate you anonymously.
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit, you never get feedback like that in life.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really something special. And it helps you see what your strengths and weaknesses are across the 12.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. There's two key areas then we can go into from here. The first is something you just mentioned about how we build emotional intelligence. Part of that, I take it, is going to involve feedback. But first of all, you mentioned that you tend to assess emotional intelligence in terms of performance. And your most recent book, Optimal: How to Sustain Personal and Organizational Excellence Every Day, is on performance and its relationship with EI. And this is your 5th book on EI. And you and your co-author, Kerry Chernis, write that the need for emotional intelligence, not just in our individual lives, but in society at large, seems greater than ever today. Why is this?
Well, I think there's been a huge balkanization of people because of social media, particularly, where people live in different reality universes. They're fed different information or misinformation, and believe in the world being different ways. And so I think the ability to reach out across those divides is more crucial than it ever been.
All right. Is it just a problem for social media? Are there other issues as well that you think make this particularly important today?
Yeah, I think that stress has ratcheted up so that what was unusual is now the norm, particularly in the workplace. And that it's more important than ever, for example, to have that ability to manage your upsetting emotions. Mm-hmm. Stress is rampant. That's why I recommend, if we can get a little technical, stress is the fight or flight response, which is relentless. If you never have a chance to recover from it, if you're constantly stressed, the literature says you get to a state of emotional exhaustion, you burn out. Mm-hmm. Exhausted, it's, you get sick, you're whatever, divorce. And so I really strongly recommend that people schedule a recovery time. And what I mean by recovery is a time when you get out of the sympathetic nervous system arousal of the fight or flight and go into the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the recovery mode. The body was designed to have a recovery time after an emergency. Right now, we're just having emergency after emergency after emergency. So I say schedule something that's going to help your body recover. It might be a walk in nature, or playing with a pet, or, being with people you love, or yoga or meditation, whatever works for you. Put it on your calendar. Do it every day because it's important. It's not a waste of time. You're gathering resources so you can continue at that sad, stressful rate that we think of as the norm these days.
Yeah. So to perform at your highest level, that has to be built in daily. So you put forward a striking account of what it means to reach an optimal state in your new book, Optimal. I was really taken aback by this. I'm just going to go through some of what you write in the book. So you write that this is to feel, quote, satisfied that you've had a good day, productive by whatever standard works for you, end quote. And interestingly, you put this forward as an alternative to consistently aiming for peak experiences, such as a flow state, because, quote, holding ourselves to the highest standard makes us prone to perfectionism that can easily bring exhaustion and burnout, end quote. And you describe this vision of optimal as, quote, the performance equivalent of the notion in parenting that we don't have to be the perfect mum or dad every moment, but rather just do the best job we can. This is super interesting. Can you please tell us how you reach this account of what it means to perform optimally?
Well, we looked at research that had been done at Harvard Business School, really fascinating research. They asked about 1,200 men and women to keep a journal daily of what their experience was at work and how they felt, what happened, what caused the feelings. And they correlated that with times that people said they had a really good day. And what they found was that good day correlated with people being very engaged in what they were doing, feeling satisfied with their work, working at their best, being very creative, feeling very good. As I said, that was the common denominator,
Right.
having warm, close relationships with the people they work with. These were all attributes of the optimal state. And as you say, in the book Optimal, we propose that it's probably, or maybe definitely better, to aim for having an optimal day, which is a day that you actually can do something to make happen, rather than expecting to have a flow experience where you're at your peak. And as you know, the flow research, which was done at the University of Chicago by a team led by Mahalia Csikszentmihalyi. We called him Chick for short. And they asked people, all kinds of people, tell us about a time you're at your absolute best, when you outperformed yourself. And they called the phenomenology of that state flow. And it was a state where people felt they transcended time, they performed fantastically. They have many attributes. And I think it's on the same spectrum as what I just outlined for the optimal state. But the flow state is something that happens to you. You can't make it happen. And in fact, if you make it happen, I would suggest it's probably an optimal state, not a flow state.
Right.
And one way to make it happen, there may be others, is to focus, because attention, hyper-focused attention on what you're doing is a common attribute of both flow and the optimal state. This keen attention is common to both the flow state, where attention is 110%, and the optimal state. And attention turns out to be a mental muscle. It's something we can improve. It's like, if you do a simple mindfulness meditation where you bring your mind back to your breath every time you get distracted, what you're doing is strengthening the circuits for focus. So they can be built up like when you go to a gym and every time you do a rep with a weight, you make that muscle that much stronger. Mm-hmm. Every time you bring your mind back, you're making the circuitry for full focus that much stronger. And focus, I think, is a way, focusing on what you're doing right now is a way to get into the optimal state.
I see. Thank you. So we're distinguishing here between an optimal state and a flow state, right? They're different types of state on your account?
I think they're on a spectrum, but I think the flow state is a spectacular instance of an. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. And you also give an interesting original account of flow in Optimal. So you discuss in the first chapter how researchers on flow have often emphasized the necessity of pushing a skill to its limit in response to a challenge to reach flow. But you argue rather that flow also depends, and perhaps more depends, on our inner states, our emotional intelligence. So, for example, describing that research you just mentioned there on the journals people completed, you report that students in a school of architecture kept diaries of their moods and performance each day, and you found that when they reported being in a positive mood and feeling free to choose how to do their work, that was more strongly associated with the total absorption that we get into flow doing than when they felt their skills were pushed to their limit in response to a challenge. So do you see flow as more strongly associated with autonomy, if you like, a sense of control, and being in a positive mood rather than exerting a skill to its limit?
I don't know that it's either or. I think it's both and.
Okay.
I think both of them are part of the recipe for flow or for optimal state. It's funny you mentioned architecture. I have a grandson who just started studying architecture down at Tulane, and I'll have to ask him about that, because what they found in that study, as you said, was that giving students a choice, letting them gravitate toward what they are passionate about or what they're interested in, help them get into a better state of mind. And I think that's true of education generally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Thank you. So let's move more into how exactly EI relates to the state of optimal performance that you describe in your book, Optimal. Because you write in the book that emotional intelligence offers us a map of being at our best. And the first part of the book's on the emotional intelligence path to optimal performance. And you describe research showing that EI is vital to reaching an optimal state. So can you explain, please, what role exactly EI plays in reaching this optimal state?
Yeah, what we were doing was reviewing what are called meta-analyses. In a meta-analysis, you aggregate a number of different studies of the same thing and analyze it as though it were a single study. And the meta-analyses show that factors like engagement, which is an attribute of the optimal state, and which also is commonly studied by companies. There are measures of worker engagement, which correlate with profit and growth, it turns out. But at any rate, if a leader or a person is more emotionally intelligent, as assessed on an independent scale, they're more likely to be highly engaged. They're more likely to be satisfied with their work. So it turned out, when you look through the lens of standard assessments done by companies, high performance, for example, you see that it's the same as the optimal state. They're looking, using their language, their concepts and measures, at basically people being in an optimal state, and it correlates with their being emotionally intelligent, and very significantly, their leaders being more emotionally intelligent. Now, if you think about a boss you've known who you loved and a boss you've known who you hated, the difference probably is emotional intelligence. That's what's been found over and over. There's research done by Egon Zehnder. It's a global executive search firm. They looked at executives who they thought were really great because of their business expertise or analytic skills. They recommended for senior VP positions and so on. But some of them were fired later. And when they analyzed why they were fired, it was always a lapse in emotional intelligence. They were arrogant. They scoffed at teamwork. In other words, they didn't understand people. They were, I don't know. I don't want to say they were narcissistic. I don't know the study, but I don't know the people rather, but they definitely lacked emotional intelligence. That's what they decided.
Right. So as it were, as someone rises up into more senior positions of leadership, the demands on them in terms of emotional intelligence, if they want to be great at that role, increase, as it were.
Well, yeah, there was a very interesting article in the Harvard Business Review. It was about 20 years of looking at what was being asked for in postings for senior executives. And they found that soft skills like emotional intelligence were up 30%, hard skills down 40%. In other words, the higher you go in an organization, the more people skills matter. Because basically, the art of leadership is getting work done well through other people.
That's a great quote to take away from this episode. So of those 4 key areas of EI, self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management, would you say that any particular one of those is especially important for great leadership? Or again, are they all a bundle?
Well, I think they're all important. The reason is, to be a great leader, you have to first lead yourself. That means self-awareness and self-management. Then, if you're, calm, cool, clear, in a best state, then you tune into other people and influence them, inspire them, motivate them. You may be a great strategist, but if you're going to implement a strategy, you can only do it through your people. And that means you have to use emotional intelligence to move them toward whatever strategy or goal you have.
So in optimal, you describe the subjective elements of being in an optimal state. In other words, of having a really good day, as feeling good, feeling more creative and more productive, having a positive outlook, being mentally sharp, and giving and receiving support in relationships. How did you reach this account? Can you say a little bit more about each of those elements?
Well, those were not from our research. They're from that research at Harvard Business School, where they asked people to keep a journal of their daily experience. And those were independent variables that arose, that were correlated with having people reporting, I had a good day at work.
Yeah. And another key point you make in the book, which we mentioned so far, is that one of the benefits of this account of what it means to be in an optimal state is that it helps to reduce the risk of burnout or avoid burnout altogether.
It reduces the risk of burnout because, as I said, you know what to do to manage your stress, to manage your anxiety. And that's why I recommend people schedule a recovery. But you also are generally better able at managing your upsetting emotions and anxieties, being stressed out, anger and frustration. Those are all negative emotions that don't really have, this is a paradox. They don't have a place in the workplace, but they're caused by the workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do with that? Well, you need to manage it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to.
So self-management here involves both managing your emotions. Well, it involves managing emotions, but that involves kind of physiological management too, somatic management, if you like. So you're aware of how stress may impact you physiologically and / all the benefits of a physiological method to recover, such as yoga you mentioned, or meditating in a sauna, going for a walk in nature, whatever it might be, in terms of how it calms you down psychologically, but also physiologically, right?
So, John, here's the key. It doesn't matter what the activity is, but for it to work for you, it has to get your mind off the thing that's preoccupying you. When we're stressed, when the brain, the primitive brain, treats that as a threat or an emergency. And one of the things it does is fixate attention on what's troubling you. Mm-hmm. You want to stop that cycle of ruminating about that guy who did that thing to me at work. It's so upsetting. And what's going to get your mind off that? That's the key to what's really going to relax you.
Yeah, so that would be, if you like, the first step, right? But I assume that then there'd be certain methods that are then more or less effective. So meditation, yoga, because they're healthier methods than if someone just watched a movie whenever that happened. It took their mind off it, but they were just sitting still and they'd been sat at their desk all day, and that was the method of recovery.
Well, let's say you're a jogger and you go jogging. Well, if you jog along thinking about, well, that son of a bitch, that son of, whatever's upsetting you, it's not helping.
Right.
But if you can get into the feeling of I'm moving my feet and my body and all those nice endorphins or whatever is coming, and forget about that guy, then it works for you as a recovery activity. Otherwise,
yeah, I see. So you can have excellent recovery activities such as even yoga, but if you're spending your time throughout doing yoga thinking about and ruminating on the things that are stressing you out, then it's not having a desired effect, right?
Yeah.
On a side note, I remember listening to an interview with you a few years ago where you said that you often meditate from first in the morning right through to lunchtime. Do you still meditate that much every day?
I wish I did. I have too much going on.
Right.
I'm writing 2 books, so that's an ideal type.
Right. Yeah. But you still practice meditation regularly?
Yeah, I do. I have since graduate school.
Right. And is that your go-to recovery strategy from stress?
I would say that's mine. Yeah. But it's different for each person. So I don't say everybody should do it.
Yeah. Okay. So connectedly, I was, ahead of this, I was reviewing some of the ways in which research has shown that EI promotes various areas that relate to human flourishing, the theme of this podcast. And one of the there's many striking findings, but one concerns health. And so in your book, Emotional Intelligence, I'm thinking of like the 10th anniversary edition, when you rewrite the introduction, you describe research that shows that disturbing emotions and toxic relationships have been identified as risk factors in disease, and people who can manage their emotional lives with more calm and self-awareness have a distinct and measurable health advantage. So how exactly does building emotional intelligence improve our health in these measurable ways?
Well, thank you for summarizing the research findings. Basically, what we find is that if you're in a negative physiological state, if you're anxious all the time, it undermines your cardiovascular system, your immune system. You have a lot of inflammation, which is a trigger for other diseases like diabetes and so on. So the key is that second domain where managing emotion is part of it. But the first part is self-awareness. Do you realize what's going on when it's going on? Should I do something now? You'll only be able to answer that if you have self-awareness. And if you do have that self-awareness, then the next step is, okay, I'm feeling anxious. I need to do something that's going to either, there are two kinds of worry. One is very useful. In that kind, you think about what the problem is and you come up with something you can do to alleviate it or minimize it or help, some step you can take, and then you drop it. That's healthy. The unhealthy one is the rumination, where you think about it day and night. You wake up at 2 a.m. and it's your first thought. And that means that you're in a really negative, toxic cycle.
So emotional intelligence clearly improves key areas of well-being that support human flourishing in the most influential theories of flourishing, such as fulfillment of potential, life satisfaction, happiness, health, performance, and so on.
Relationships.
And relationships, thank you, as well, vital one. So, before I ask you this big philosophical question, let me ask you about that. How exactly does emotional intelligence promote positive, healthy relationships?
I think a lot of it has to do with that third kind of empathy, empathic concern. If you in your relationship show people you care about, people you love, that you actually have their best interests at heart, it strengthens your relationship. If you do the opposite, it weakens your relationship. So I'd say that probably the empathy aspect of emotional intelligence is the most crucial for healthy relationship.
Hi friends, Nick here with just a brief interlude to share with you an update on one of our newest partnerships with the Anti-Fragile Academy. Throughout John and I's conversations with many, if not most, of our guests, one thing has been made really clear. In order for people to flourish, thrive, experience the good life, they need to develop the capacity to not only navigate and endure, but ideally grow from the bad, grow from unpleasant experiences. That's why we're thrilled to be partnering with our newest sponsor, the Anti-Fragile Academy, an organization that I co-founded with Dr. Adam Wright, Director of Mental Performance for the Washington Nationals. At the Anti-Fragile Academy, we work with adolescent athletes, executives, and educators to help them understand some of the science, not just of optimal performance, but of well-being and anti-fragility. The ability not only to endure and bounce back from unpleasantness, but to actually come back stronger, to grow from it. Between Adam and I, we've worked with Fortune 100 companies, Inc. 300 executives, Division I programs, and elite professional athletes and Olympians from all over the world. To find out more about how you can leverage anti-fragility training, check out our website at theantifragileacademy.com.
Thank you. And so my more philosophical question here is, how do you see the role of EI in human flourishing?
I think that human flourishing is an outcome of emotional intelligence.
Wow. Please elaborate.
Okay. So someone who's flourishing, someone who has really positive, a positive life, is someone who is self-aware, someone who knows how to manage their negative emotions and marshal the positive ones, positive states, someone who's able to tune into the people they really care about in a caring way, and to put that all together to have resonant, nourishing relationship. That's flourishing, as far as I can see.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, it seems like it may well be a necessary condition for flourishing. It's interesting to think of it as an outcome of it, though. So you would hold the view that we can't flourish unless we have a sufficient degree of emotional intelligence.
I would say that, but I think there are other ingredients too. One, for example, is having a strong sense of meaning in your life, a mission or purpose. What is my life 4. That's a meta question. It's not, probably actually self-awareness helps answer that question. Mm-hmm. What is it I care about? What is it I love doing? You'll only answer that, which is a values question, if you can tune into what really matters to you, and your body will tell you.
Yeah. Have there been any studies on the relationship between emotional intelligence and people gaining a clearer sense of meaning or purpose in life?
None that I know of. Do you know of any?
I don't. Before this, I looked into the possible relations between emotional intelligence and the key domains of flourishing. I couldn't find any on that particular area.
But, it makes sense to me. And I would propose that someone do that study. Are there any graduate students out there?
I'll put a post out, see if there's anyone interested. That would be a great study to do. It's also occurred to me of the domains often referred to in accounts of human flourishing, another that emotional intelligence relates to is the development of character and virtue. In that, building emotional intelligence will involve building character virtues such as empathy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's connect that up then with a practical set of questions then. There'll be many listeners who would love to know the most effective ways to build their emotional intelligence. And I know that you work a lot on the organizational level as well as the individual level and with leaders and educators. So let's start off with the individual.
Well, let's start with kids.
Perfect. Let's go for it.
There's a large, actually a global movement of what's called social emotional learning, which emotional intelligence fit into the standard school curriculum. So kids might have 10 or 15 minutes a week on how am I feeling and why, or how do I say, for teenagers, this actual lesson, how do I say no to my friends who want me to take drugs and keep my friends? These are really vital questions for kids, but they're not answered by maths. Yeah. They're answered by, brainstorming with other kids in a SEL class. So it deals with life situations that matter to kids at its best. Things like Sesame Street, that program is all about emotional intelligence, actually. Embedded in the different skits are lessons for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. Mm-hmm. And how to manage my impulse, for example. There are many, many ways to teach it. At the corporate level, I see what's called training and development as adult education, basically. Many corporations offer courses in, they might call it how to have a difficult conversation, or how to be influential, or they use different language depending on the organization. Every company is a culture, and they have their own ways of putting things. But essentially, I once looked at a study done by the Conference Board, which is an amalgam of different corporations, and they asked them to say what were the areas that their senior executives were coached in most often. And 80% was emotional intelligence, but not necessarily in that language. Different language, different terms for essentially were aspects of emotional intelligence. So I would say that at the adult level, emotional intelligence, unlike IQ, is learned and learnable. And you can learn it at any point in life, but you have to be motivated. I have a friend, Richard Boyatzis, who teaches at the business school at Case Western. And he's just coming out with a book, A Theory of Change. He calls it intentional change theory. Mm-hmm. He says the first step in getting better in this skill domain is to ask yourself, what are my hopes and dreams? What matters? Where would I like to go in life? And then with that in mind, to see, well, where am I now? What are my strengths? Where could I grow more and get me toward where I want to go? And then to think of a specific way of practicing that and doing it at every naturally occurring opportunity. So he's found in his research, that he does this with executive MBAs, MBA students, that if they do this, they'll make the change they seek. Like, I want to be a better listener. That's a common problem. They'll make the change in 3 to 6 months, But he's found asking people where they work up to 7 years later to evaluate them, that they've kept that change. In other words, this is learning that sticks. And I think it sticks because it actually changes the brain. It makes something new, like I'm going to listen to people instead of interrupting them.
Yeah.
It makes that, if you practice and practice, at first it's uncomfortable, but it gets easier and easier. Then it gets instantiated in a primitive part of the brain that regulates habit. And now you do it automatically. Mm-hmm. That's found that it had become automatic in people. So there are ways to learn. In fact, they've been verified by follow-up at brain science.
So does it become more difficult to build as we started off talking about children there, but you also mentioned you can build at any stage of life. Does it become more difficult to build later in life given that neuroplasticity is higher when we're younger?
That's why I'm a big advocate of SEL, because you have a window of opportunity. As you get older, it's a double challenge because you have to unlearn the bad habit and then relearn a better habit. So that's a harder kind of learning. But for kids, they haven't yet embedded these things in what's going to be a lifelong habit. So you have a one-time opportunity to help kids get it right in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I see. But it can be built throughout life. It's just that the difficulty is that we have to unlearn certain bad habits or habits we want to change to learn the new habit, right?
So here's an easy way to understand it. Cross your arms, please.
Sure.
Okay. Now cross them the other way. That's the new habit.
Right. It's not so easy.
It's not so easy, but that's what it's like to try to learn this as an adult. And, you've crossed your arms thousands of times that way. And now you're trying to do it the opposite. So mindfulness is very important, for example. Mindfulness helps you realize here's an opportunity to try it the new way. A naturally occurring opportunity, whatever it is that you're trying to learn. And then you intentionally do the new thing, the new way. It feels weird at first.
Yeah.
The more you do it, the more natural it gets. It's like riding a bike. Same.
I see. So, and mindfulness would be relevant here because you're paying close attention to the way it feels, what the body's doing. You're becoming more self-aware of it somatically as well as cognitively as you're doing it.
I didn't think of that. I think you're right. But I was thinking being mindful of some naturally occurring opportunity. Like if I'm going to become a better listener, the brain doesn't distinguish between home and work. You can do it with your teenager as well as your coworker or whoever it is. But you want to use naturally occurring opportunities as the training ground for whatever it is you're trying to learn.
I see.
Mindfulness means, here's a chance for me to do it a new way.
Yeah. Okay, so if we're applying then social, emotional learning, let's say, in adulthood, one of the key takeaways here is to look for difficult scenarios where we have to challenge ourselves to think of what the right thing to do would be, such as you mentioned the example of the child who wants to maintain relationships with their friends despite their friends doing things they don't want to get involved with.
Right.
It would be like when we face these kind of scenarios in life in general, having a difficult conversation with a friend about something but maintaining the friendship and so on. Maybe the friend is a colleague. You have a difficult conversation about something that happened at work while maintaining the friendship. Seeking those out, if you like, or not shying away from them and entering them with an approach of trying to build your skills in these kind of situations. Yeah,
and I think it's important to understand you shouldn't try to do it all at once. Mm-hmm. Work on one thing at a time. Pre-rehearse. Think about situations you're going to run into and what you might do differently. That helps you do it. If you try to do more than one thing, it can be overwhelming. Yeah. It's hard enough to do that one thing.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm glad you mentioned Sesame Street as well, by the way. A friend of mine actually did a postdoc on education at Sesame Street. It's fascinating the work they do there on making the show educational.
I was at Sesame Workshop where they put this together.
Yeah.
And they said, none of the writers are here. They're all in a meeting with a developmental psychologist. Wow. In other words, every skit on Sesame Street is a lesson for kids to learn dressed up as a Sesame Street skit. So, for example, cognitive control is really important for kids. Cognitive control means you can say no to impulse. Mm-hmm. And, the famous test of this was done at Stanford. It's the marshmallow test. You take a and put them in a room with a marshmallow and say, you can have it now if you want, but I'm going to run an errand. If you wait till I get back, you can have two. And then they leave the room and that poor kid is staring at the marshmallow. And about a third of them grab it and gobble it, and maybe a third wait till they come back. Those are the kids with what's called cognitive control. And follow-up show that they'll do better in life in terms of income and health. They'll flourish, actually. Mm-hmm. Think of it. Kids who have poor cognitive control, or people who have poor cognitive control through life, have very bad health and die younger, for example, and probably will not be able to hold a job. But anyway, that's a different story. In cognitive control, though, in Sesame Street was taught through a skit where Cookie Monster wants to join the Cookie Connoisseur Club. Mm-hmm. And you recall Cookie Monster can't do anything but munch a cookie. That's all he wants. And in the Connoisseur Club, you have to look at the cookie and sniff it and see if it's okay. And then you can take a nibble. So it was really hard for him to learn this, but he finally did and got to join the club. So that was a lesson for kids in cognitive control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned the marshmallow test, because that is, I know that you discussed that in some depth in your book, Emotional Intelligence. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually, because that's been mentioned a bunch of times in this podcast, we've never really dug into it. And this would probably be the perfect context and area in which to connect it. So cognitive control is the skill that you find is most correlative with the children that were able to resist eating the first marshmallow and wait for a second one, wait a short period of time, right? The research is just leaving the room and coming back shortly, right?
For a 4-year-old, it's endless. It's 7 or 8 minutes.
Right. Okay. Okay. So it's quite a while. And then you measure later in life. So success in terms of career success, but also health, physical and mental health. Are those measured later on in life as well?
Yeah. So basically what we're talking about is that cognitive control is one of the ingredients of flourishing. Mm-hmm. You can't flourish if you have poor cognitive control. Mm-hmm. But you give in to every impulse that comes along.
Would you say that's interchangeable with the notion of delayed gratification?
Oh, yeah, it is delayed gratification.
It is the same thing. Okay, because that is actually used, the Human Flourishing Program at Harvard, in their measure of flourishing, the ability to delay gratification is one of the areas that measures the character and virtue element of the flourish measure, interestingly.
Interesting.
And so one further question on the measurement here. What further timestamps, how long were the timestamps taken when they were taking the marshmallow test age 4? At what point were they assessing them later in life? Was it like various timestamps, age 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on?
So the marshmallow test works for 4-year-olds. It doesn't work at other ages. Yeah. There are many ways to measure cognitive control. When cognitive control is measured in midlife, it predicts how long you'll live. It predicts health, basic health.
Right. And how are they measuring? What I actually meant, was the 4-year-olds when they were assessed, and then they looked at their ability to delay gratification in relation to their long-term health and success. Did they assess them age 40, 50? Not did they give them another marshmallow at like age 40 or so?
Yeah. I don't know exactly how they measured it, but they found, for example, in a study in New Zealand, they studied every child in the city of Dunedin. Yeah. I think university there, and born over a year. And they followed them all. And they found that cognitive control in childhood predicted health, income, and also on the negative side, whether you end up in jail. So cognitive control is extremely important. And it turns out that the kids who at 4 didn't have it so well, but who got it by age 8, say, had the same benefits as those who always had it.
Right. Wow. Okay. Thank you. So we've discussed there how to build EI on the individual level. Mm-hmm. Building cognitive control is one of the key elements, looking for difficult emotional scenarios in life and ways to challenge ourselves to face up to them and handle them as well we can. At the organizational level, among leaders and teams, for example, what's the most effective ways to build EI there?
Well, a lot of corporations have EI offered in their menu in training and development. And I won't say what's the best, but I would say that the Boyatzis model is the best tested one. And I would say that what doesn't work is to do a 3-hour workshop or a 1-day offsite. There's no follow-up. You need follow-up. You need support. The best the companies that we've studied that do this the best have, for example, a monthly meeting where people talk about what they're trying to develop and what they've done well, what they haven't done well. They support each other, or to have a coach who will support you in trying to change your habits. So there's not one model. I'd say it's a kind of a multimodal progression of models, many ways to do it. But the keys are that you tie what a person's trying to do to where they want to go in life, that you reduce it to a single thing they can practice at one time, that you support them in that, and that they actually are supported in practicing it as much as they can in natural situations, not phony situations or artificial situations. And I wish more corporations would do this. A lot of them don't pay much attention to it. I think there are also a lot of people in leadership positions who maybe shouldn't be. If you ask people about bad bosses they've known, they'll tell you. That's a problem that we know about them. Yeah.
Yeah. So this connects with something you mentioned at the start of the episode about the importance of feedback for building EI, right? So one strategy you recommend one very good one is to have a coach who gives feedback to the person who's trying to build their emotional intelligence on, let's say there's some area they want to focus on in relation to their goals, might be building empathy as a leader or cultivating psychological safety among teams. And the coach then giving the feedback on how they did on that. And I assume this coach would be an expert, let's say in emotional intelligence, how they could improve upon that, and then assessing their progress over time and giving feedback accordingly, right?
Yeah. And when you say feedback, I would include support. Not saying you did that well and you didn't do that well, but rather that time that you blew it, that you're telling me about, well, let's think through what you could do when that situation comes along again, and rehearse how you could do it better. In other words, putting a positive spin on the learning rather than I'm overcoming some weakness, I'm trying to build a strength.
Yeah. Thank you. So let's, as part of the final area of discussion today, think about the future of emotional intelligence. In the final part of your most recent book, Optimal, you explore the future of EI, and you write that EI can better prepare us for the uncertain tomorrow we all face. So how do you see the future of EI, and how can it help prepare us for an uncertain future?
Yes. Well, to the extent that the future includes people and how people relate to situations and act in situations and adapt to situations depends on how well their internal resources are available to them. I think that emotional intelligence will always matter as long as people are involved. However, I think we need other things too. We need systems understanding is a big one. We need to support creativity. We're going to have to be enormously innovative to survive in the future. And I think creativity and systems thinking complement emotional intelligence in a way which will help us all have a better future. That's what I'm hoping.
Thank you. Can you just say a little about what you mean by systems thinking and systems understanding? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Take the environment. The environment is a complex mingling of endless systems. There's climate. There's not just climate, but there are the ways in which human actions interfere with nature's systems. For example, everything we buy and use has a negative footprint in terms of environment. And by negative footprint, I don't mean just carbon. I mean the 8 systems that support life on the planet drinkable water, for example, biodiversity. So the more we have extractive industries, our phone, here's my phone. The phones involve extraction in about 150 different places. By extraction, I mean mining, taking something from nature.
Right.
When we take something from nature, we weaken it. And then when we add stuff back that doesn't mix, like plastics, which is based in oil doesn't mix with anything in nature except other petroleum products, then we're diminishing nature. So it takes a really sophisticated understanding of systems about how we might reduce our impact and still live. So everything that surrounds me has had a negative impact on nature in some way. It's true of all of us. Can we gradually get better? One way that I think we might get better is if there were what's called ecological transparency, where when you're about to buy a product, you knew its actual impacts.
Yeah.
There's methodology now that will actually reduce impacts to a numerical system. They can be rated, but they're not, because no corporation wants you to know what the truth is about its impact on nature. But if that were true, then we'd make lessening impacts a real competitive arena for companies. And that might help us going into the future. So you asked about a systems understanding. That's a good example, I think.
Right. So thank you. A systems understanding then is kind of a more holistic understanding of the way in which some product you buy or some activity you do impacts nature, let's say, or a culture or society of people in a certain way, or both of those areas. And so when you make decisions to buy something, do something, you're aware of the good and bad ways in which that impacts the world, and so can make more informed, holistic decisions.
Ideally, but that's just one example. Other system, the information is a system. I'm reading this new book by Yuval Harari, which is the history of information systems, going to AI, but starting with prehistory, and it's rather stunning. And so we live in an information world without realizing it. And there are different information worlds, and that matters too. So that's just another example of a system. Systems are everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I assume just a group of people would be a system too, in the sense that, let's say you want to be a great leader and build great emotional intelligence. To be a great leader, you have to be aware of the impact your actions will have, not just to some individual on your team, but to all the people in the organization, perhaps the customers or clients as well. That would be a systematic level understanding as well, right?
Yeah. We've been doing some research on teams in companies. Very interesting. High-performing teams are emotionally intelligent at the group level.
Right.
So they have self-awareness as a group. They manage themselves as a group. They have what are called norms, ways they agree on that they're going to act. And they often will appoint someone as an ambassador to another group, even in another company, that they depend on, because they understand the system that they're involved in. And so that's another aspect of group level emotional intelligence, which I think is important too.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. All right. For our last question, we ask all our guests this question. We call it the flourishing question. What is the one lesson on flourishing that you'd like our listeners to walk away with, and a practical step for putting it into action?
So flourishing. I think that flourishing as a group, as a collective, starts with the individual, and emotional intelligence starts with the individual. So managing and knowing your inner life is going to help you be the kind of person that other people will want to be with. That's it.
That's a great final lesson from this episode. Thank you so much, Daniel Goleman, for your time today. In a great conversation. I've learned a hell of a lot from it. We'll link, of course, all of your website and your key work in our show notes, especially your most recent book, Optimal: How to Sustain Personal and Organizational Excellence. Thank you so much, Daniel.
My pleasure. Thank you, John, for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to Flourish FM. We hope you enjoyed the content. Please be sure to leave us a 5-star review and hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to your podcast and on all major social media platforms.
And if you visit our website, flourishfmpodcast.com, you can sign up to our newsletter. We send out a weekly newsletter. First newsletter of every month, we share a long-form blog, and every newsletter, every week, we share highlights from our previous episodes. Please hit subscribe on our website.